There's been a lot of talk online about a possible remake of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that's supposedly in the works by Nintendo. Now, these rumors are as of yet unconfirmed, and there's even speculation that these leaks were false information deliberately spread by Nintendo to find out where the leak is. So it remains to be seen what the truth is in this matter, but it has been interesting to see Ocarina of Time being discussed in this modern age of gaming. A possible HD remake would draw a whole new audience to the game, and I've seen some fans worrying that newer players perhaps won't understand what all the hype was about if they just play a graphically upgraded version of this 28-year-old game. When these rumors first popped up in the light of the 40th anniversary of the Legend of Zelda series, I was actually wondering that same thing. Would younger gamers who have never played Ocarina of Time before, for lack of a better term, get it? After all, Ocarina of Time is still frequently mentioned at or near the top of best video games of all time lists, and for whatever it's worth, to this day it's the highest rated game on Metacritic. There's no denying though that, as with any game from that era, the design of Ocarina of Time definitely shows its age when you go back to it. That's why, for this video, I'd like to explain to you how Ocarina of Time earned the reputation that it still carries. I'll show you what the game industry looked like when it was released in 1998 and what its influence and legacy have been since. From one generation to the next, I'll try to answer that one question. Why was Ocarina of Time such a big deal? Just to get any misconceptions out of the way, it's not like Ocarina of Time is a chore to play these days. Sometimes older games can feel so archaic that it's best to just remember them for their contribution to gaming rather than actively playing them. But Ocarina of Time is actually still a lot of fun. Of course, you'll need to deal with some inconveniences and other limitations, but if you're into playing retro games in general, this is par for the course. We all understand that, for instance, first generation PlayStation games didn't have HD textures because they simply weren't a thing back then, or that the first couple of Doom games had sprite-based enemies because that's just where the technology was at back in those days. Old games are limited by their contemporary hardware, but sometimes that can even add to the charm. Whenever you play a good game from long ago, you'll notice how creative developers could get when working with a limited toolbox. In fact, part of the enjoyment of playing old games is finding out about all the smoke and mirrors that developers employed to make those games happen. Like, I could not believe what I heard the first time I learned that Wolfenstein 3D was actually a 2D game made to look 3D with some clever trickery. Yet, even when you enjoy these games for the first time decades after they were first released, there's one thing that's much more difficult to grasp intuitively: the historical context. The ability to truly understand why people were all going crazy over a particular game back then. And the bigger the reputation of that game is, the higher not just your expectations are, but perhaps also your skepticism. You might come into a game with an attitude of, alright, let's see what the hype's all about. Part of me certainly felt that way when I played games like Super Mario World or Fallout New Vegas for the first time, long after their respective legacies had already been cemented. There's just a certain temptation about disliking something that's universally acclaimed, or maybe that's just me being a contrarian. In any case, when it comes to reputation, it doesn't get any bigger than Ocarina of Time. Back in the day, it was seen as the perfect game. Nearly every outlet gave it a perfect 10 out of 10. And sure, scores are just that. A bunch of numbers given out by people who got paid to give their opinion on video games. Those opinions are not just related to the core quality of the game, but also factors such as mass appeal, cultural trends, industry standards, review methods, and sometimes even the personal bias of the reviewers. Had all these things remained the same, a later Zelda title like Breath of the Wild would probably have matched Ocarina of Time's Metacritic score. But even taking all of this into account, Ocarina of Time deserves all the praise it got back in the day. Initially, it might be difficult to grasp why though. Don't get me wrong, even to a brand new player with no context, the base quality of the game will still be obvious. It has a fascinating story, intricate dungeon design, and excellent gameplay mechanics. But it might be difficult to pinpoint exactly where that chart-topping X factor came into play. Part of the issue stems from the speed at which the gaming industry was evolving in those days. To give you a notion of how fast trends were changing, we just need to look at another Zelda title, Twilight Princess. To this day, it's the Zelda game most similar to Ocarina of Time, and it released only 8 years later, in 2006. By that time, the formula that both games used already felt quite dated, especially when compared to other adventure games that featured an open or semi-open world. So if you are used to modern open world adventure games, you may indeed struggle to see what the big deal is with Ocarina of Time. The thing is, 3D open world adventure games did not exist as such when Ocarina of Time came out, at least not in the form and volume of today. Ocarina of Time was released for the Nintendo 64, so it was part of the first generation of console games where 3D had become the norm. As such, 3D games were still experimental, with developers taking most of the console generation to figure out all the ways in which to exploit this new technology. During most of the 1990s, developers used platformers to showcase the technological capabilities of their hardware. On Super Nintendo, Super Mario World had been the perfect demonstration of the console's color schemes and high-quality sprites. Meanwhile, Sega created Sonic the Hedgehog to show how fast and smooth games ran on their Genesis, or Mega Drive, console. So, when the Nintendo 64 arrived in the second half of the decade, it was initially Super Mario 64 that showed not just what that console could do, but how game design had shifted overnight. Super Mario 64 did away with the traditional level progression that most platformers had featured up until that point, opting instead for a more open-ended structure where you could explore each level freely and at your own pace. It laid much of the groundwork for what would eventually become known as 3D open world and sandbox games. While it is an adventure game rather than a platformer, Ocarina of Time was a crucial step in this evolution towards modern gaming. Where Super Mario 64 was already a lot less linear than its predecessors, it still had clearly sectioned off levels, within which you were free to explore. So it had open world elements that were contained within smaller individual levels that had nothing to do with each other. They were partitioned pockets of player freedom. By contrast, the land of Hyrule in Ocarina of Time was created to feel as one coherent, interconnected world. It still featured separate areas, but all of them fed into the world at large. Clearing a dungeon could have ramifications for how the overworld would look or behave. Exploration and curiosity, while not required, were often rewarded. A thing that we take for granted nowadays, but such breadth in game design simply wasn't common back then. For a long time, hardware space was so limited that every part of a stage or a level in a game needed to have some sort of direct gameplay function attached to it. But Ocarina of Time showcased Nintendo's increasing comfort with just letting players discover the game world themselves. That's not to say there was no linearity at all. You would need to complete a set of tasks in a specific order to progress through the game's main story, unlocking new areas along the way. But you were otherwise free to explore, do side quests, or really just nothing at all. By now, this description might fit half the new games coming out today, but I cannot stress enough how revolutionary this felt in a 3D game back then. When it was released in 1998, I first played Ocarina of Time at my cousin's house, and I was simply blown away by the very concept. You mean to say I can just stand somewhere without being harassed by a timer or a muscular objective to avoid an imminent game over screen? Eventually I would actually annoy one of my cousins by wanting to play the game without any clear goal in mind. I just wanted to explore, or even just stand still and take in the atmosphere. At the time, I simply called this behavior hanging out in the game. But looking back, I realized that I just wanted to be in the world, without any sort of mandatory objective hovering over my head all the time. Coming to the Nintendo 64 from purely level-based games such as Super Mario Bros. 3 and Doom, this sense of freedom in a game felt almost dreamlike. And it's exactly this sensation that will be difficult to relate to if you grew up in a generation where this had been normalized to a point where, right now, it seems like the default choice. One interesting bit of trivia about Ocarina of Time is that Sam Houser, one of the creators of Grand Theft Auto, described that series' first 3D entry, GTA 3, as Zelda meets Goodfellas. GTA 3 is, by itself, one of the most important games when it comes to popularizing the open-world sandbox design philosophy that's still dominant today. It was released in 2001, and for many of the years that followed, it remained the reference point for player freedom in a game. Other 3D open-world games were even called GTA clones for a while. It then says a lot that for the people who created GTA 3, their frame of reference for that open-world concept was Ocarina of Time. It's just an indication of what made Ocarina of Time such a big deal and how profoundly it influenced the course of gaming history. But rest assured, there are plenty of other reasons to appreciate Ocarina of Time's design heritage. Similar to Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time wasn't great because it invented things from scratch. Rather, it took several experimental concepts, fleshed them out, and combined them into a product that then solved several game design problems all at once. Lock-on targeting, also called Z-targeting at the time due to the button you used for this mechanic, already existed. But up until that point, it had never been as smoothly executed and as central to the core gameplay experience as it was in Ocarina of Time. Similarly, cinematic storytelling had been attempted before, but the way that Ocarina of Time told a story while resisting the urge to over-explain everything in 20-minute cutscenes felt like a breath of fresh air. A moving story that contextualized what you were doing and why, but never got overbearing. And finally, even if open world design was not pioneered nor elevated to its final form in this game, Ocarina of Time proved that such an approach could be integrated into a coherent, structured 3D game experience, telling an engaging story while respecting both the pacing and player agency. I could explain each of these things with all the detail in the world, but ultimately, they might still seem abstract to someone who arrives at this game in 2026, even if it's been fully remastered. In a way, Ocarina of Time suffered from its own success. Every brilliant idea I'd had has since been adopted and refined many times over, so much so that going back to the game that popularized many of these trends might leave younger gamers unimpressed. By modern standards, Ocarina of Time is fairly linear, its overworld is small and empty, and the puzzles it offers are not particularly challenging. But just get this, the sheer magic I felt when I was first let loose on Hyrule Field, that's a high I am still chasing when I play video games today. Very rarely do I find it again. To try and grasp this, maybe think of your craziest game idea, like your dream game that you just know will never happen because it's too out there or too technologically advanced. And now imagine what it would feel like if that game was suddenly released. That's kind of what Ocarina of Time felt like. It was as if I could physically feel game design leap a generation forward. Like a video game experience I'd barely dared dream of had suddenly become a reality. So, if an Ocarina of Time remaster does end up materializing, and when you play it you find yourself wondering what the big deal is, try to imagine that, at one point in time, every single polygon in this world felt like a revolution in itself. Maybe then it won't seem so puzzling that we all went crazy over this game so many years ago. Alright, thank you for watching. This is my first video in a while, and I know I've been irregular with uploads. If you like my insights though, consider subscribing to my Substack, where I post a new long-form article on gaming every Saturday. In fact, this video script is based on one of my articles. Links in the video description. As is Zelda.